Okay.
I like that question. That was a good question, Representative. Thank you.
All right, members, any other questions for the Comptroller Hager?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members.
Thank you. Yes.
Oh, you got, yes, sir.
Representative Harris.
Go ahead. Yes, sir. Yeah, I can.
We're kind of having coffee with each other this morning. Couple things on the surplus, because we've been talking about that a lot. And I've heard you reference a lot of things: historic cash carryovers,
Right.
record high inflation,
Yep.
large dollars coming from the federal government. To simplify this, though, for folks coming home, I mean, the ultimate originating source of these funds are taxpayers.
Taxpayers pay all of these on this chart right here.
Yep.
Yes, but there are contributing factors as to why people pay more or less taxes.
That's right. And so,
And yes, we pay taxes to the federal government. Those funds come back to the state in certain amounts. There were
Yep.
larger amounts than ever after post-COVID. That's the
correct.
point.
No, and I appreciate that, because of course, for the federal government to have dollars, they had to tax
That's
people, right? And then also, same thing though, when we're talking about record high inflation, the implication there is things cost more.
Yeah,
Therefore,
the-
6.2 or 8.25.
The simple point that I make is that if you bought something for $100 last year and you paid 6.25, as in the state portion, not the local portion, and then this year after inflation you pay 110, you would think, oh, 6.25 on $10 didn't add up.
Yeah.
It added up.
Yeah.
It really added up during that post-COVID ramp up in spending.
Right. So we have all this excess from those sources, which ultimately originated with the taxpayers. So effectively a surplus, I know it might be a slight oversimplification, but the point would remain that we have a surplus because we have overtaxed citizens above and beyond what we need for the maintenance of government operations. Is that
I think
largely right?
when you look at budget after budget, I don't disagree that's a way to look at it.
Yeah.
But when there's anomalies in large amounts of money, and
Yeah.
when you go up essentially 25% in total tax collections from one year to the previous, that has never happened in Texas history. And so therefore, the point is, each of you that were sitting here didn't make a conscious decision, oh, we're going to overtax people by 25%. I mean, it was these massive anomalies. So, how do you adjust that going forward, whether that was property tax reduction, whether it's water infrastructure funding, or whatever you did last session, if that makes sense.
No, 100%. And the questions weren't to the point of
Yeah.
intention or
Yeah,
motivation,
no, I understand.
just the
Yes.
effect.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
yeah. Okay, thank you. Want to go back, I'll actually want to stay on the surplus for a second, because there's been a lot of talk about the dedicated funds, which, as an aside, and if you feel like opining on it, I understand you're not the policymaker here, we are, but I mean, maybe I'll start, two questions, you can answer them in whatever order you want. I mean, is it something that the legislature should start considering, whether it actually makes sense to have such a high percentage of these revenues in dedicated funds, given A, the fungibility of dollars, two, your ability to still utilize them for certification purposes of the budget? So that's sort of one piece of it. And then I guess the second, maybe that's easier for you, is your math. Just how much of the budget surplus would you say is available for purposes of property tax relief?
So that last one is up to y'all's decision. Not going to get into that. The fact is, obviously, I have heard about property tax for a long time.
Yeah.
That's one that continues to be, even though the state is constitutionally prohibited from collecting a property tax.
Yeah.
We don't collect any pennies, but that's all we talk about, because obviously that's an important issue for all the constituents. So, the appropriate amount is y'all's decision. But prior to, on GRDs, general revenue dedicated accounts, as we were talking about, those have been something the legislature has really, I want to say, struggled with, tried to figure out how to right-size that. I will give, for example, TERP, emission reduction, is the largest piece of that. If you don't collect it, you're penalized by the federal government, because you have to collect it, but there's only so many things you can utilize it for, and so that fund has actually grown. And so that's the biggest piece, is my point.
Right.
The legislature, back several speakers ago, when Speaker Strauss was here, that was one of his top issues over and over and over.
Yeah.
Those were brought down. We got rid of several GRDs, but even though there's been attempts to reduce them and bring them down, certain reasons they've gone back. So my point is, I think it is something you continue to look at and try to figure out how to right size that, because they are continuing to grow.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like that game of whack-a-mole. kind of whack-a-mole to try to get it down and thought it was going forward, and then here we go back up.
You know, it just seems like something, and from my perspective, the legislature may want to give more consideration to, and I think you're
and
more
I
or less
think
confirming that.
Yes, sir.
Back to the first question, though, how much would be available? Because, I mean, we've got the surplus, I'm looking at it right here, 23.76. If the legislature was hell-bent on maximizing property tax relief, because you are correct, the state of Texas does not come in and collect property tax levies. But if we were hell-bent on maximizing the dollar amount that we put into however we do it, exemptions, compressions, and maybe, actually maybe I'll ask you a question about that in a second, but is there anything that would preclude us from using 23.76?
Oh, you could use every penny on any type of issue in the budget.
Thank you.
But the question is it going to be here next session
Yeah.
to actually do
That
it
is
again?
No,
Now, whether you do that in Health and Human Services and transportation funding, property tax reduction, the question is it there in 2 years to do it again? Because once you make the commitment, it's on you.
That's correct, and certainly the ongoing concern nature of the questions doesn't elude me in asking it. I'm just wondering sort of what is the the maximal production possibility frontier if we wanted to throw all of it at property tax relief? We could do it, right?
Well, I think you can do a lot of things.
Right, but we could do it.
Well, you can also jump off the roof. But I mean, I'm not trying to play a game.
No,
I'm just
I
trying
don't
to make a point. That's why y'all are the policymakers.
And that's why I'm
your
asking you just say
decisions.
an objective, like a subjective, or I should say a positive, not a normative question. It's a positive question,
Understand.
non-normative. Okay. On the rainy day fund, you mentioned a couple options of what we could consider doing given the dollars that are flowing into it. You mentioned, if I heard you correctly, I scribbled down, we could remove the cap or continue sending more to GR. Those are two options you laid out for us. But one option I didn't hear, but I want to make sure that we could consider a third option, which would be to reduce severance taxes.
Yeah, you can do that too, which I know is going to get brought up. So that's also one option.
Right. Because, I mean, right now the ESF is funded pretty heavily on the backs of our oil and gas sector. And
That's
any option to
principally-
provide relief to them, I think
Principally
is-
where the revenues come from.
That's right. Because one thing also we could do that I didn't hear mentioned, but just want to make sure we're not precluded from it. I mean, when we experience economic downturns, we could also cut spending to combat the pressures from the revenue side, right?
Of course, government can decrease just as much as anything
I just want to make sure,
else.
because I don't hear that talked about a lot. Since I've raised homestead exemption versus compression, just curious if you do have an opinion on that. That's a big discussion down here. Do you know, but again, not what we
Yeah.
should do, but from your share, because you've got the data,
Right.
do you know if one versus the other, increasing homestead exemptions versus increasing rate compression, which one would have a benefit towards a greater number of Texans?
Yeah, I didn't look at that before I came, and I haven't looked at that for a while.
Could I
But
follow
we're,
up with-
we're
could I
happy
follow
to
up with
play.
your office
We're
on
happy to
that?
play a role in that.
Yep.
As we go through this session to help y'all figure out where that lands.
Okay. One other question related to data, because you mentioned the property tax relief, or somebody here did, in 23 that we did last session, as it was heralded by many as the largest property tax cut
Right.
in Texas history. Do you know in the subsequent years since that was passed in 2023, did property tax revenue go up or down in the 2 years since then?
I don't have that in front of me. I think historically, property tax revenues have continued to move up, but also every morning when you wake up in the state of Texas, there's another 1,600 people that call Texas home today.
Absolutely.
They did yesterday. So the point is, the economy continues to grow, the state continues to grow, assets are built on the ground which have improved values, and so that portion continues to grow. So my guess is pretty much every year it's continued to go up. I think there's
Yeah.
only 1 year, if I recall correctly, that property tax values in the state were essentially flat.
Yeah, the
Only
reason I asked,
1
I
year
thought
in
I
the
had
last
thought I had seen data
40
come out
decades.
from the comptroller. So I don't have
Yeah,
it on
yeah,
either,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I can follow up with
Yeah,
you on that
yeah,
one too.
yeah.
And then just, I guess in closing, one point of clarification. One of my colleagues mentioned this 4.5 billion from last session that wasn't allocated towards public
Right.
education. I do think it bears noting that wasn't sent down to the schools because a coalition of folks in the minority party and anti-school choice members of the majority party refused to allocate even $500 million for school choice. So I think that clarification needs to be noted. But thank you very much for being here.
Thanks.
Representative Berry?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hager. Thank you so much for
Yes,
coming
sir.
out today. I appreciate all the information. It was